the guardian of the stone circles. Mist rose low over the hills of the Brecon beacons at dawn, spreading like a silver veil that seemed to breathe slowly above the wet grass. At that early hour, when the sky still held traces of deep blue and the air smelled of cold earth, almost no one walked the worn paths winding through the moorland. But Rhys did. Rhys always woke before the sun, perhaps because he had grown up hearing his grandmother say that the first light kept secrets, or perhaps because the silence of those early hours was a gentle companion. He moved calmly, with soft steps, as if afraid to disturb the ancient whisper of the wind across the open land. That day, however, he had no clear destination. He simply let the path lead him, while the mist parted before him, revealing clumps of purple heather and puddles reflecting the waning moon. He knew that land well, yet there was something different in the air. A faint vibration, almost impossible to detect, as if the world were breathing in a new way. Maybe it was only his imagination. After all, the stories his grandmother told about the ancient stone circles had always stirred something inside him. A subtle tremor, a feeling he could never fully explain. The path curved gently, bordered by tall ferns that seemed to watch him. Rhys lifted his face and breathed in the cold scent of dawn. And that was when he saw the first sign of it. A line of standing stones, barely visible through the thickest layer of mist. He did not remember ever passing that way before, even though he had spent years exploring that corner of South Wales. But the moors kept their own whims, and sometimes a new clearing seemed to open where there had once only been brush and wild growth. Even so, something inside him recognized the place, as if a soft and distant voice were whispering that the circle had been waiting for him. He moved forward slowly, letting the silence settle around him. As he drew closer, the mist pulled back like a curtain drifting aside, revealing 10 great menhirs arranged in perfect harmony. Each one had a different shape, grooves that looked like the marks of time, cracks that seemed to hold old stories. Moss climbed their bases, and silver lichens glimmered faintly beneath the dim light of dawn. Rhys felt a deep calm, almost solemn, as though he had stepped into a place where the ancients still walked. But what truly caught his attention was not the arrangement of the stones, nor the serene stillness of that forgotten place. It was the light, or rather, the absence of it. Because even before the sun had risen, when everything should have been submerged in one even half-darkness, Rhys saw shadows moving among the stones. Long, wavering shadows, shifting with a slow rhythm, as if they were breathing with the stone itself. He blinked several times, tilted his head, walked a few steps around the circle to see whether perhaps a branch or rocky formation was casting that strange play of shapes. But no, there was nothing there that could explain the shadows. There was no source of light. And yet the silhouettes kept sliding along, wrapping around the forms of the menhirs, stretching as if they wanted to reach for him. A chill ran down his spine. It was not fear. It was more like the feeling that something very old was watching him with curiosity. He moved closer. The air was still, almost suspended, and his breathing grew slower without him choosing it. He noticed that the shadows seemed to rise from the base of the stones, as though they were being born out of their deepest cracks. They moved slowly, fluidly, like reflections on water. They were beautiful, he thought, in a strange way, as if they belonged to some ritual or phenomenon that time had forgotten. He stretched out a hand, not to touch the shadow, but to feel the temperature of the air, to see whether the dampness held some trick. Nothing. Only the gentle breeze of those hills. "You should not go so near." The voice startled him, but it was not harsh or alarming. It was deep, calm, a little roughened by the morning cold. Rhys turned slowly and saw an older man leaning on a dark wooden staff, watching him from the edge of the clearing. He wore an old wool coat and a scarf wrapped around part of his neck. His face was marked by deep lines, but his eyes were remarkably clear, a pale grey that reminded Rhys of still water before a storm. Rhys swallowed softly. "I did not know this was here," he said quietly. "I did not mean to disturb anything." The man gave the faintest smile. "You are not disturbing anything. The stones are the ones who decide whether you are welcome." A brief silence followed, a pause that settled like a soft cloak. Then the old man walked slowly toward the circle. "What is this place called?" Rhys asked. "It has no name that maps remember," the man answered calmly. "But those of us who still listen to the murmur of the earth know it as the Circle of Oaths." Rhys drew a deep breath. The air smelled of wet rock and something else, a faint scent like heather in bloom. "Oaths," he whispered. "Ancient pacts," the old man said, "sealed here so long ago that only echoes remain. Each stone holds one, and every shadow you see is part of the oath it protects." Rhys turned his gaze back to the shadows. They were still moving slowly, like sleeping creatures breathing to the rhythm of the earth. "I thought they were something strange," he said. "They are," the elder replied, "but they are not dangerous. Not to those who respect the circle." The old man stepped closer to one of the menhirs. He brushed it with the palm of his hand. The shadow, coiling around its base, seemed to recognize him and withdrew obediently, like an animal stepping aside to let him pass. "Do you live near here?" Rhys asked. "Since as far back as I can remember," the man replied. "I am the Guardian." The word settled into the air with a quiet but steady weight. "The Guardian of the stones?" "Of what they keep," the old man corrected. Rhys felt a slight shiver, though it was not unpleasant, more a mixture of wonder and respect. "May I ask what they keep?" The old man looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his sincerity, or perhaps his stillness. "Stories," he said at last. "Promises. Bonds that joined the clans when the land still spoke clearly. Not every oath was noble, but every one was solemn. And the stones hold them so they do not break before their time." Rhys frowned slightly. "Before their time?" The old man inhaled deeply, like someone preparing to reveal something important. "An oath can wear thin, like a rope, like the stone that bears it. If a stone falls, the oath is released, and not everything bound here should awaken." The wind shifted then, softly, carrying a murmur that seemed to rise from the ground itself. Rhys lowered his gaze to the nearest menhir. Something there had changed. The shadow that had been moving with such a measured rhythm trembled in a different way now, as though some inner thread had drawn tight, as if something patient beneath the rock was waiting. The Guardian noticed it too. "Ah," he whispered softly. "I can feel it already." "What is happening?" Rhys asked. The old man planted his staff into the ground and remained silent for a few seconds. Then, in a grave but composed tone, he said, "One of the stones is failing. Its oath has carried more than it was meant to. And when it breaks, what it holds will be free again." Rhys felt the air grow slightly thicker, as if the world itself were holding its breath. What is it holding? The Guardian looked at him with deeply calm eyes, without a trace of alarm. A fragment of shadow that no longer remembers its name. And a forgotten name can be more powerful than a remembered one. Silence fell between them, with a quiet, almost ritual weight. "Can I help?" Rhys asked in a low voice. The old man studied him once more, with that gaze that seemed to see through the mist itself. "Perhaps. But first, you must hear the story of the circle. Because it all began with a young man who, like you, was looking for nothing and yet found this place. A breeze brushed the stones. The shadows rippled, as if waiting, and the Guardian began to speak. The old Guardian inclined his head slightly, as though greeting an old memory that had just arrived. His grey eyes drifted for a moment toward the gentle line of the hill, where the mist was beginning to rise, thinner now, lighter. Rhys felt something change in the air with that gesture, as if an invisible page had been turned to reveal a chapter that had been waiting centuries to be told. He remained silent, attentive, letting the sound of his own breathing soften until it seemed like a natural part of the wind. The Guardian rested both hands on his staff and began to tell the story in a low, steady voice. "They say," he murmured, "that this circle was raised when the clans of the valley still walked beside the spirits of the land. Not spirits as people imagine them now, vague figures or distant voices. They were real presences, as clear as a friend beside you on a journey. The ancestors spoke with them, sometimes in words, sometimes with gestures, and other times by sharing silence alone. The land understood that silence, and they understood the land." Rhys closed his eyes for a moment and pictured it. Men and women moving through hills, even wilder than these, accompanied by presences unseen but kind, leaving their traces on the wet grass. "Among those clans," the Guardian continued, "was one known as the Children of Lawen. They were a small people, but they were known for a singular gift. They could sense the shadows untouched by light, not shadows of darkness, but shadows of memory, fragments of time preserved in ancient places. Where others saw only stone or forest, they saw echoes of what had once been." The Guardian smiled softly. They were skilled at walking among memories. They could feel what had happened on a hill, or what promise had been made beside a stream. Rhys opened his eyes. The shadows around the Menhirs rippled with a slow movement, as if responding to the tale being told. "One of those children of the clan," the old man went on, "was a young man named Emrys. He possessed the strongest gift anyone could remember, and because of that he was often sought out to settle disputes or recall forgotten pacts. But Emrys did not want to be a sage. He wanted to be a wanderer, someone who explored the edges of the valley, who learned the whispers of the trees and the murmur of the rivers. He felt himself being called from somewhere he could not yet see." The wind seemed to pause for a moment. "One day," said the Guardian, "Emrys heard a different kind of murmur, something that came neither from the forest nor from the sky. It was a very faint sound, like a distant heartbeat, and he followed it. He walked for hours, perhaps days, until he arrived here, at this clearing. There were no stones then, only a small rise covered in grass, and a ring of shadow at its center, so perfect it looked as though invisible hands had drawn it." Rhys felt his skin prickle softly. The Guardian spoke calmly, without drama, yet every phrase carried the weight of something old and true. "Emrys stepped closer," he continued. and felt that the shadow was searching for something in him. Not in a hostile way. It was more like curiosity. Those shadows, the shadows of memory, did not always remain still. Sometimes they searched for someone who might understand them, and Emrys could. The Guardian drew a deep breath. But that shadow was not only a memory. It was something trapped from a time before the time of the clans. A fragment of pure night that no longer remembered its name. Rhys shifted slightly, an instinctive movement, as if that detail had touched something inside him. Things without names, the old man explained, can be as gentle as a stream or as deep as an abyss, but they always seek identity. And if they cannot find it, they cling to the first place where they sense a familiar echo. According to the tale, the shadow clung to Emrys. Not violently, the Guardian clarified. It followed him, stayed beside him like a new shadow, one born not from his body but from his spirit. Emrys did not fear it. He chose to understand it, and together they traveled the valley, exploring places where the land held stories so old they could barely still be heard. Silence drifted down again, soft and enveloping. Rhys realized he was breathing more slowly. There was something in the rhythm of the story, something natural, like a boat being rocked gently on water. But with time, the old man continued, the shadow began to change. It was inevitable. Everything joined to a human being takes on some part of their shape, and everything made of night absorbs some part of the light it touches. The shadow began to dream, and in its dreams it searched for a name. It could feel that it had once had one, long ago, but it did not know what it was. That absence unsettled it, like a hollow that never quite fills. Rhys watched the shadows of the circle. They moved slowly, in a sway that felt like a long, deep sigh. Emrys wanted to help it, the Guardian went on, but he did not know how. So he sought out the elders of his clan. They listened to his account with care and gathered for 3 nights to decide. At last, they understood that the shadow belonged to a greater cycle. It was not a spirit, nor a memory, nor an echo. It was a fragment of primordial night, an ancient part of the world left loose, like a seed without soil. And a seed, if it finds nowhere to anchor itself, can grow in unpredictable ways. A gentle breeze swept through the circle. The Guardian closed his eyes for a second. The elders feared the shadow might one day begin to consume the memories of the valley, in search of clues to its name, not out of malice, but out of need. So they chose to protect it, and to protect the valley from it. Then they built this circle. Emrys helped them. He spoke to the shadow, cradled it, soothed it when its restlessness grew. And one day, when he was ready, he made a choice. The Guardian leaned slightly over his staff. Emrys gave his name to the shadow. Rhys's eyes widened in surprise, but the old man continued serenely. In the ancient days, to give one's name was not to lose it forever. It was to offer a part of the soul, so that another being might complete its identity. The shadow accepted. For one brief moment, the two were one. And then, with the help of the clan, the oath was sealed in stone. The Guardian moved his hand through the air as if stroking a memory. Each Menhir holds a fragment of that pact, an oath that keeps the shadow sleeping, at peace, with no need to seek further. Emrys became the first Guardian. His gift, joined with that of the night, transformed him into someone capable of hearing even the oldest sighs of the earth. Rhys looked at the stones in silence. something in his chest shifted with a deep calm, as if the story were touching something long hidden within him. "And now," the Guardian whispered, "one of the oaths is about to break." The words floated there, slow as leaves falling onto a lake. Rhys lowered his gaze. Beside the most weathered menhir, the shadow trembled faintly, with a pulse it had not shown before, as if something inside it were slowly waking. The old Guardian sighed. "When an oath weakens," he murmured, "someone new must listen. Someone who can see what others cannot. Someone who arrives seeking nothing, and without knowing it, is called by the shadows." Rhys lifted his eyes. They met the old man's. "Is that why I am here?" he asked softly. The Guardian did not answer at once. He studied the cracked stone, studied the way the shadow pulsed gently, like a heart remembering a dream. At last, he spoke. "Yes," he whispered, "because there are nights that choose the ones who hear them." A deep pause wrapped itself around the clearing. Rhys felt the world breathing around him, slowly, as if everything were settling itself for the next part of the story still waiting to be revealed. Rhys remained silent, standing among the menhirs, feeling the calm of the place settle over his shoulders like a warm mantle. Although the air still held the dampness of dawn, there was an ancient delicacy within it, as if every breath of wind carried a whisper that had not fully belonged to this time. The shadows kept moving slowly around the stones, but now their motion seemed more aware, more attentive. Rhys had the strange impression that they were listening to what he was listening to, that they were a natural part of the story now unfolding. The Guardian took a few slow, almost ceremonial steps, until he stood before the most deteriorated menhir in the circle. A vertical crack ran through the stone from its middle to its base, a thin but deep line that looked like a thread of dark light. There, the shadow surrounding it vibrated with an uneven rhythm, as if it were trying to remember how to breathe. "This is the one that is about to break," the old man murmured. "Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Stones do not fall all at once. They grow tired." Rhys approached slowly, unwilling to disturb the stillness of the clearing. Up close, the shadow seemed denser, though it did not frighten him. It had a quality that felt serene, as if it were sad more than threatening, like a memory that had not yet found its rest. "May I touch it?" he asked quietly. The Guardian gave a gentle shake of his head. "There is no need. Shadows do not need contact to know you. They are already doing that." Rhys felt a small chill, but it was not unpleasant, more like a cool caress moving across his skin with the delicacy of a rain-soaked feather. The Guardian spoke again, this time in a more intimate tone, like someone revealing a truth kept hidden for too long. "A shadow that forgets its name can remain peaceful for centuries," he explained, "as long as something holds it. But when that support wears away, it begins to seek. It does not seek light or darkness. It seeks identity, and if it cannot find it, it may cling to the first one that resembles it." Rhys swallowed. "To me?" The old man regarded him with serene clarity. "It might, but not to harm you. That has never been its nature. It simply wants to be whole again." A soft rush of wind passed across the clearing. The heather surrounding the circle swayed like a purple and silent sea. For a moment, Rhys felt that breeze had not come only from the valley, but from the very heart of the stones. "The oath that keeps it calm is made of 3 parts," the Guardian continued. "The first is the stone, which bears the burden. The second is the memory of Emrys, sleeping in the very heart of the circle. And the third is the Guardian. Rhys turned toward the old man. You? The old man nodded, though his smile was soft and held not the slightest trace of pride. Each Guardian inherits an echo of the first, not his name, because that no longer belongs to him, but a part of his bond with the shadow. My task has been to keep the balance, to listen to the cracks in time, and hold the calm of the circle. But I am old, Rhys, and the stones know it. The shadows know it too. A light pause followed, barely more than a breath. What happens, the old man added gently, is that circles are never left without a guardian. When the time comes, someone is called, and you came without looking. That is usually sign enough. Rhys felt the wind whisper something in his ears, a murmur beyond understanding, but warm. What he felt was not fear. It was a kind of recognition, as if an old and quiet voice were telling him that this place had been waiting for him since long before he was born. I do not know whether I am ready, Rhys admitted softly. No one who has been called ever was, the Guardian replied. Not even Emrys, but you do not need strength or power or special knowledge. You only need to listen. Shadows speak in a way few understand, but you heard them before you knew what they were. Rhys felt the cracked stone vibrate faintly, very faintly, like a sigh, and a gentle image crossed his mind, so light it could have been an illusion, an ancient forest beneath the blue light of a dawn that did not belong to this world, and a shadow beside him walking like a silent companion. The Guardian rested a hand on Rhys's shoulder. It was a warm, steady touch, the touch of someone who knew the path he was showing all too well. There is a way to hold the oath a little longer, he said. It will not fully mend it, because the stone is exhausted, but it will keep the shadow from waking before its time. Rhys looked up. What must I do? The old man smiled with a tenderness that seemed to hold entire landscapes within it. Listen to it, that is all. If a shadow that no longer remembers its name feels that someone recognizes it, it calms, it grows still, and the oath will hold a little longer. Rhys took a small step forward, moving closer to the stone. The shadow trembled when it sensed him, but not with unrest, with expectation, as though it were stretching out arms toward him without having any arms at all. Rhys inclined his head and let his breathing slow, very slow. You do not need to speak, the Guardian whispered behind him. Just let it feel your presence. Shadows understand silence, sometimes better than any sound. Rhys closed his eyes. As he did, he felt something soft, a brush, as if the shadow were coming close not to touch him, but to wrap him in a memory so ancient it escaped all shape. It was neither cold nor warm. It was deep, like being beneath water without pressure, floating weightless. For a moment, the entire clearing hung suspended in a calm so pure, it barely seemed real. The wind stopped moving. The heather stood still. Even the birds, which had begun to sing timidly in the distance, fell silent for no apparent reason. Rhys felt an echo, a gentle pulse that was not his own. A heartbeat that seemed to come from a time before names. He accepted that pulse without resistance, and then the shadow calmed. It became more even, softer. Its ripples fell into rhythm with Rhys's breathing, like two patterns finding a common point. When he opened his eyes, the shadow lay quiet at the foot of the cracked stone. The Guardian was watching him with a mixture of relief and sadness. You did well, he said quietly. Very well. You have given the oath a few more days, perhaps weeks. The circle recognizes you. Rhys let out a long breath, as if he had not realized he had been holding the air inside him. And now? He asked. The Guardian turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the mist was beginning to dissolve, revealing gentle green and brown lines of hills fading into the distance. Now I will teach you what it means to listen, he said slowly. Because when the stone breaks, the shadow will awaken, if only a little, and it will need calm, not commands, not fear. Calm, and you will have to offer it that. Rhys felt a soft weight in his chest. It was not anguish. It was something closer to responsibility, but wrapped in tenderness, like a small flame that had to be cared for so it would not go out. But before that, the old man added, pointing to the tallest menhir in the circle, you must learn Emrys's dream. Rhys looked up. The shadows around that menhir moved differently, slower, deeper, as if they were guarding something that belonged both to the sky and to the earth. The Guardian approached the menhir and rested his staff at its base. Because while the shadow sleeps, he dreams as well. A soft gust made the lichens on the rock tremble. And his dream will show you what truly awakens when an oath is broken. The horizon slowly brightened with the light of the rising sun. The circle seemed to wait. The first ray of sunlight slipped out from behind the hills. Only a thread of light, not enough to fully disperse the mist. Yet in the clearing, that light had a different effect. It did not illuminate. Instead, it awakened a faint glow across the rough surfaces of the menhirs, as if revealing an inner pulse that usually slept. Rhys watched the phenomenon calmly, feeling the warmth of dawn brush his skin with delicate gentleness. The shadow beside the cracked stone remained still, resting like an animal that had just settled itself to sleep. The Guardian moved toward the tallest menhir in the circle, the one he had said held Emrys's dream. Rhys followed him very slowly, noticing that each step altered the sound of the earth beneath his feet. It was as though the grass vibrated with a slightly different tone around that stone, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. This was the first one raised, the old man explained softly. It was not carved, nor moved by human strength. They say the earth itself pushed it upward when Emrys gave his name, as if the land recognized there must be an anchor to hold what was being born. Rhys passed a hand through the air without touching the stone, but he could still feel the silent presence of something sleeping inside it. The shadows around it moved to a different rhythm than the rest of the circle. They were not restless. Their motion was like a sigh, repeated in deep sleep. You said Emrys dreams, Rhys recalled. What does that mean? The old man turned slightly toward him. When Emrys gave his name, his spirit became bound to the shadow in a place that cannot be broken, he explained. But for the oath to endure, his body could not go on living as it had before. He did not die, not exactly. He became an echo, a guardian sleeping within the stone. His wakefulness holds the shadows calm. His dream maintains the balance. While he dreams, the shadow sleeps. While the shadow breathes peacefully, the stone remains firm. Rhys let the words settle inside him. Everything he was hearing carried the taste of an ancient truth, one that did not need explanation beyond the serenity with which it was being told. And can I see that dream? He asked carefully. The Guardian nodded. You will not see images, nor hear words. Emrys's dream is like a still lake. It is enough to feel it, and if the circle has accepted you, you will be able to walk a little upon its surface without sinking. Rhys stepped a little closer to the menhir. The guardian lifted the staff and gently pressed it against the base of the stone. Then, with a slow gesture, he invited Rhys to close his eyes. "Breathe," he murmured. "Do not try to search for anything. Let it come to you." Rhys obeyed. He inhaled slowly, feeling the cold of the morning enter his chest and mingle with the newborn warmth of the sun. For a moment, nothing happened. Only silence, the faint wind, the muffled murmur of the valley waking in the distance. But then, a different sensation began to surround him. It was a deep resonance, like a heartbeat coming from very far away. Not a human heartbeat, but something wider, older, as if the earth were breathing through the stone. Rhys felt the shadow of the menhir lengthen around him, not touching him, but wrapping him in a serene dimness. There was no fear, no unease, only a calm so deep it felt like a blanket laid gently across consciousness. And then he felt it. Not a voice, not an image, a presence, a soft clarity like moonlight floating on a dark lake, a sense of quiet waiting, a dream without hurry. Rhys sensed faintly that the dream was not empty. There was something inside it, a name, not a spoken name, but a name that had been offered, guarded, given as a bridge. He did not understand its syllables, because they were not syllables. They were a shape, an echo, a cadence that held the dream together and kept it whole. The guardian spoke in little more than a whisper, without breaking the stillness. That is what holds the shadow, that echo, that calm. But if the stone falls, the dream will weaken, and the shadow will wake without guidance. Rhys kept breathing slowly. Emrys's dream felt cold and warm at once, like laying a hand on the trunk of an ancient tree. There was something profoundly human in it, and yet something that went beyond any body or face. And then a second heartbeat appeared, very faint, very fragile, like a drop falling onto the surface of a still pond. Rhys opened his eyes slowly. For an instant, the shadows had stopped moving. The guardian was watching him with quiet attention. "You felt it," he said, his voice almost inaudible. Rhys nodded. What was that second heartbeat? The old man rested both hands on the staff. "It is the sign that the shadow is beginning to wake," he explained. "For now, it is only a flicker, a reflection that barely touches the surface. But when the stone breaks, that second pulse will become constant, and then the shadow will search for its identity, because it will no longer have Emrys's calm to hold it." A breeze descended from the hill, brushing the lichens on the stones. "But it will not wake alone," the guardian added. "It will look for something it recognizes, and you have already shared your breath with it." Rhys remained still. The thought did not frighten him, yet he felt a soft weight, like the hand of someone asking him to walk beside them down a long road. "What exactly will happen when the stone falls?" he asked. The old man moved the staff in a small circle through the air. "The shadow will rise and spread," he said, "not to harm you, nor to harm the valley, but it will seek. It will want to remember. It will want to find something that tells it who it was. It cannot become part of the original night again. That cycle closed too many centuries ago. But it can form a new bond, one that completes it without breaking anything." Rhys inhaled slowly. "A bond with me?" "If you accept it," the guardian replied. "If you listen to it, if you allow it to learn through you, It is not a bond of burden or danger. It is a shared path, where you give it a fragment of identity, and it gives you a fragment of memory. A balance. The shadows around the tall menhir began moving again, very slowly, as if they had been waiting for the conversation to end before resuming their gentle dance. But before that, the old man added, "You must learn the language of shadows. It is not spoken in words. It is spoken in presence, in stillness, and I will show you how." The guardian walked toward the center of the circle. There, the grass lay shorter, as if generations of invisible footsteps had kept it in a state of quiet respect. Rhys followed him. The stones surrounded them like silent witnesses. The shadows breathed to the rhythm of the wind. The guardian lifted his gaze to the sky, which was beginning to soften into a pale blue. "Sit here," he said, pointing to the center, "and for the first time, you will hear the full whisper of the circle." Rhys sat down slowly, letting the cool grass touch his hands. The guardian remained standing, his presence itself forming a bridge between the stones and the boy. Then, in a voice barely louder than a murmur, he said, "Do not fear what is about to awaken. Fear is light that burns too bright, and shadows prefer tranquil dusk." Rhys closed his eyes. The earth beneath him seemed to breathe, and the circle, almost imperceptibly, began to speak. When he closed his eyes, Rhys felt the world settle itself around him with the gentleness of a blanket being slowly spread over a tired body. The grass was cool beneath his hands, and the earth gave off a faint warmth, as if it had preserved the remains of ancient nights, still breathing deep within it. There was no sudden sound, no vision that shook him. It was a subtle shift, nearly impossible to perceive, as though silence itself had changed texture. The guardian remained standing a few steps away, leaning on his staff, watching him with deep serenity. "Just listen," he said, though his voice was so soft it was felt more than heard. "That is how the circle speaks, slowly, without urgency." Rhys breathed deeply. The air entered cold and left warmer. With every breath, something inside him became stiller. And then he noticed it. A murmur. Not a direct sound, but a vibration, like a finger tracing an invisible path across skin without quite touching it. It came from the menhirs, from the shadows surrounding them, from the very ground. It was a broad, enveloping murmur, not trying to reveal secrets, but simply to accompany. Rhys let that vibration move through him without trying to interpret it, and little by little, the murmur transformed into something clearer. Not words, but rhythms, as though each stone had its own way of breathing. Some were deep, almost like thunder very far away. Others were quick and light, like leaves stirring beneath an ancient tree. The shadows, for their part, had a different pulse, steady, soft, close to the heartbeat. The guardian spoke again, slowly. "What you hear is the balance, the way the oaths are held. Each stone keeps a story, each shadow a fragment, and you are learning to hear how they intertwine." Rhys kept his eyes closed. The murmur began to reveal itself as a faint harmony. Not music exactly, but a series of echoes that recognized one another. It was as if each stone remembered its part of the pact, and together they formed a chant that kept the shadow of the oath asleep. But there was something else, a hollow, a silent space within that harmony, like a note that had once belonged to the chorus, and now existed only as absence. Rhys frowned slightly. The guardian understood without needing him to explain. "Yes," he murmured, That hollow you feel is the crack in the oath, the place where the stone has grown tired, the silence that should not be there. Rhys let the silence wrap around him. It was a cold silence, but not a threatening one. It felt more like longing, like walking through a place where someone had once been and was no longer there. "Can it be repaired?" Rhys asked very softly, without opening his eyes. "Not in the old way," the Guardian answered gently. "Stones complete their cycle, just as the seasons do. When a menhir is exhausted, it can only rest, and what it holds finds a new way to exist." Rhys inhaled slowly. Wrapped in the murmur of the circle, he felt something warm touch the edge of his awareness. A soft presence, like mist sliding across the surface of a calm lake. It was not invasive nor urgent. It was curious. The shadow. Not the shadow in the crack, sleeping only halfway, but a deeper one. The one resting at the foot of the tallest menhir. The one holding Emrys's dream. Rhys did not open his eyes. He allowed that presence to come near the way one lets a shy animal sniff the palm of a hand. It was a gentle, unhurried sensation, as though that fragment of shadow sensed in him a vibration that felt familiar. Then, very slowly, a feeling unfolded inside Rhys. It was not a word, but it resembled the idea of home, an ancient home, built not of walls and roofs, but of memory. Emrys's dream. The Guardian spoke in the faintest whisper. "You can feel it now. He dreams of what he protected. He dreams of the shadow he cared for. He dreams of the valley, of its people. And in that dream, the echo of his name still lingers, the same one he offered to preserve the balance." Rhys felt that the shadow rising from the dream did not seek to touch him or join with him. It only observed him, as if it wanted to recognize the shape of his presence. The sensation was warm and deep and light all at once, like an ancient memory wrapping itself around him without disturbing him. "Why? Can it feel me?" Rhys asked, still without opening his eyes. "Because the shadow sleeping in the menhir is remembering you," the old man replied. "Not the way someone remembers a person from the past, but the way one recognizes someone who shares the same rhythm." Rhys opened his eyes slowly. The dawn light was soft, almost golden, and the circle seemed to breathe with it. The shadows were still moving, but with a steadier rhythm now, calmer. The Guardian smiled. "It has accepted you." A deep calm ran through Rhys's arms and chest, as if an invisible weight had at last found a place where it belonged. "What does that mean, exactly?" he asked. The old man came closer and sat down beside him, letting his bones rest with a long sigh. "It means that when the stone falls, the shadow will not awaken alone," he explained. "It will seek you, not to possess you, nor to confuse you, nor to take something from you. It will come to complete itself, to balance its nature with yours, to find rest in a shared identity." Rhys lowered his gaze to the ground. "I do not know if I can hold something like that." "You are not holding the shadow itself," the Guardian replied softly. "The shadow has its own strength. What it needs is a place to lean so it can remember, like a tired traveler needing a lantern lit on a moonless night. You are that lantern." A warm breeze passed through the heather. Rhys raised his eyes toward the cracked stone. The shadow trembled very faintly, as if it had heard its name within a dream. "And how long is left?" he asked in a calm voice. The Guardian studied the crack with experienced eyes. He stroked his staff, as if that gesture might help him measure the invisible. "A few days," he said quietly. "Perhaps a week. Stones do not rush, but neither do they stop. When the moment comes, you will know. Not by the sound, but by the silence. Rhys nodded. The Guardian rose slowly to his feet. "There is one more thing you must learn," he said as he walked toward the lowest menhir in the circle. "The gesture that invites a shadow to rest." Rhys stood as well and followed him. "A gesture?" he asked. "Yes. Ancient, simple, but powerful. Shadows respond to gentle movements, to those that express calm and continuity." The old man raised his hands and, with slow movements, traced a circle in the air. Not a perfect circle, but one that began broad and then narrowed softly inward. It was a gesture like cradling something unseen, guiding it toward a center. "That is how you call a shadow to tell it it is not lost," he explained. "That is how you show it that it may come close without fear." Rhys copied the movement. His hands drew through the air with care. At the sight of the gesture, the shadows shifted into a slower rhythm, more measured, more harmonious, as though they understood. The Guardian smiled with tenderness. "You see, they are listening." Rhys repeated the gesture. The circle answered with a sigh of wind. "When the night of waking comes," the old man said, his voice almost ritual, "this will be your first greeting. With it, the shadow will know it is not alone." Rhys drew a deep breath. He felt the warm earth beneath his feet. He felt the stones around him, firm and ancient. He felt the shadows breathing. And in the middle of all that, he felt a path opening with the softness of dawn, a path that had been waiting for him. The days that followed passed with an almost ritual calm, as if the valley itself understood that something silent and ancient was preparing to awaken. Sunlight fell more softly across the heather, and the nights seemed to stretch a little longer, as though they wished to make room for the dream before it fully opened. Rhys returned to the circle each morning and each dusk, and with every visit he felt a small change, one too subtle for anyone who did not listen with great care. But he had already learned how to listen. The shadow beside the cracked stone breathed with a slower, deeper rhythm, as though it were preparing to open its eyes after a very long sleep. The Guardian watched with the patience of time itself, seated in silence on a nearby rock, never interfering, never interrupting. Sometimes he spoke with Rhys, but at other times he simply let the boy walk around the circle, repeating the soft motion with his hands, that circle narrowing inward, inviting the shadow to trust. Every time he did, something in the air vibrated. It was not a sound, not a visible movement, but the sky itself seemed to grow wider, as though it recognized that silent conversation. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, like a golden coin sliding between the fingers of the horizon, Rhys noticed that the murmur of the circle had changed. It was a slight change, almost shy, but as clear as a whisper spoken in the stillness of a library. The Guardian lifted his head as if he had felt it too. Rhys approached the cracked stone. He placed one hand on the grass, without touching the rock, simply sensing its presence. And he felt it, a new silence. Not emptiness, but a contained stillness, like the very instant before a door opens. The Guardian rose slowly, leaning on his staff. "It is coming," he said in a low voice, softer than ever. Rhys nodded. He could feel the earth beneath his feet vibrating in a different way, as if some underground current had chosen to reveal itself for a brief moment. The shadows around the circle began moving in a more harmonious rhythm, as if they wanted to gather, to accompany, to be present for what was about to happen. daylight faded into a faint glow. The sky deepened into a rich blue, and the first stars appeared like white flowers, suspended in an endless garden. Rhys stepped back, giving the stone space. The Guardian stood beside him. "When the stone finishes growing tired," he said gently, "there will be no noise. It will not fall the way trunks fall or walls collapse. It will simply let go, like a sigh." And that was exactly how it happened. The crack, which for days had been only a thin line, opened a little more, slowly, without violence. The stone leaned slightly, as though bowing to the earth. And then it came to rest at an angle it had never held before, a gesture that was not destruction, but rest. A sigh. Rhys felt the air change. It did not become colder or warmer. It simply changed. The shadows around the cracked stone trembled, as though waking from a deep sleep. A denser, more compact form began to rise from the base of the menhir. It had no clear outline, but neither was it shapeless. It seemed made of the same dimness that fills the hours of twilight. Rhys breathed slowly. The shadow took a small step forward, like a creature stretching itself awake at dawn. There was no haste, no threat, only a slow, curious movement. The Guardian inclined his head slightly toward Rhys. "It is time," he whispered. "Tell it, it is not alone." Rhys felt a soft tremor in his hands, not from fear, but from reverence. He lifted his arms slowly, with the same delicacy he had practiced in the days before, tracing that broad circle narrowing toward the center. A gesture of invitation, of calm, of companionship. The shadow saw him, and something in it softened. It came a little closer, moving like dark water and night wind. Rhys did not step back. He let the shadow recognize his presence. He inhaled slowly, exhaled gently, and the shadow, as if it understood that rhythm, adjusted to it. The Guardian watched in silence, his eyes bright with the look of someone witnessing an ancient handover, a cycle opening once again. Then the shadow came before Rhys. It did not touch him. It did not wrap around him. It simply stopped in front of him, as if waiting for something. Rhys lowered his hands slowly until they rested over his chest. A simple gesture, human, intimate. And in his mind, or perhaps in the air itself, he offered a thought that had no shape as words. "I am here." The shadow seemed to incline itself, as if recognizing a new promise. And in that gentle gesture, without noise, without light, without drama, Rhys felt an echo move through him. It did not invade him. It did not absorb him. It was more like an ancient memory settling upon him like a feather made of night. A memory of moonless roads, of names dissolving into silence, of nights that listen. And at the same time, Rhys felt that something of his own traveled toward the shadow. Not a name, because that act belonged to Emrys and to older times, but a presence, a rhythm, a way of breathing that the shadow accepted with gratitude. The Menhirs vibrated with a soft murmur, almost a melody. The Guardian closed his eyes with serenity. When the shadow drew back a step, Rhys felt that something inside him had changed. Not a burden, not a weight, more like an expansion, as if the world of night now breathed beside him with the familiarity of a companion who does not disturb, who simply remains. The shadow slid back toward the center of the circle, not to hide, but to rest once more. Its form settled beside the newly tired Menhir, ready for a different kind of sleep. No longer the sleep of forgetting, but the sleep of shared calm. The Guardian approached Rhys and laid a warm hand on his arm. "You are part of the circle now," he said with a deep smile. and the circle is part of you. Rhys let out a long sigh, full of a peace he had never known before. The stars shone more clearly above the Brecon beacons. The wind was softer. The night was wider. "And now?" Rhys asked, his voice seeming to rise from the deepest part of his chest. The Guardian looked toward the Menhirs, toward the shadows breathing slowly, toward the earth that seemed to slumber in serenity. "Now," he answered gently, "you rest, you watch, you listen, and when the shadow needs a memory or a presence, you will be there, just as it will be there for you. It is not a duty, it is not a burden, it is a shared path, and shared paths always rest in calm." Rhys looked at the entire circle. He felt it was his without possessing it. He felt its rhythm, its age, its breath. And beneath the clear sky, with the shadow peacefully sleeping only a few steps away, he understood that he had found a home unlike any other. A home made of gentle night, ancient stones, and silent promises. A home that would remain with him always. As the stars rose higher in the sky, Rhys sat down on the grass. The shadow from its corner breathed in harmony with him. And so, in that clearing forgotten by maps, but protected by the deep memory of the earth, his life as guardian began. Not a guardian of danger, but a guardian of calm. A guardian of shadows seeking rest. A guardian of the circle